guys? Welcome to an interview edition of I Am Kenny Biddle. This time around, instead of me talking to you for like an hour or so, I'm going to let somebody else talk to you. I had the opportunity to sit down with somebody that means a lot to me when it comes to writing about paranormal topics and from the skeptical point of view and doing science and research and backing up your claims. All this kind of shit. I was able to sit down with Dr. Joe Nickell. Yes, the guy that works for the Center for Inquiry, Skeptical Inquirer magazine. He writes his own books about all kinds of paranormal and religious topics and stuff like that. Really good. If you don't know who he is, you should look him up. If you really don't know who he is, I can tell you that if you've ever watched those like paranormal documentary kind of shows, whether it's ghosts or UFOs or Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, usually the skeptic that they have on is usually Joe Nickell, or it's Ben Radford, but a lot of the older ones, and a lot of them are Joe Nickell. And the guy is he's smart. He's got a lot of experience. He's been doing this for a long, long time. And he's somebody that I've really looked up to. Like I said, I've collected his books. I read his work constantly every time it's out in Skeptical Inquirer magazine. And I had the opportunity because I saw a show that talked about his Skeptiseum. And it's a museum, not really a big museum, it's like a personal museum, kind of like all the stuff that I have around here, not just the books, but the knickknacks and stuff. But it's all the stuff that he's collected over the years from his travels, his investigations, all over the world. And it was really cool. I saw it featured on a documentary. I contacted him about it. I didn't think I was going to get a response, but I did. So I was frickin' happy, and he invited me up. Gave me a phone number. I called him. I talked to him on the phone for probably about 45 minutes. It was great. He invited me to come on up, and that's what I did. I drove up to Buffalo, New York, because, I wanted to see him. And we hung out. And what's even better is I expected to hang out for like an hour. Sit down, ask him a couple questions, look around the items that he has. And what really happened is that I ended up staying for, like 7 hours I was there. So I heard a bunch of stories from him, which are really cool, about his adventures and his investigations. I asked him questions, and he took me on a tour on everything, not only the stuff in his Skeptiseum, but all the stuff in his office. And I found out that just being in his office, what you see here is it's getting to where he is. I mean, I thought I was bad with books. He collects it. He's got like twice as many as I do. So I'm gonna shut up here. I am gonna give you a little heads up though. I took my Nikon to do these the videos, and like I said, I was only expecting to be there for an hour. My Nikon only records 20 minutes of video at a time. So some of the clips are gonna kind of cut off. So I'm gonna piece them together so they go a little bit smoother. But I wasn't able to get the entire interview because I'm a rookie at this video stuff, and I really need to learn my lessons and get better equipment. So if anybody has video equipment you want to send it to me, I'll take it. So I think there's like 5 videos that I'm going to piece together, and it's just different questions and different topics that he talks about. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you take something away from it, learn something, because I did. And it was nice talking to him. You'll notice that I'm a little nervous. I'm a little, I guess, starstruck, because I'm not as confident as when I'm talking to, the camera by myself. Talking to this guy, I was a little bit nervous, and you'll hear that. But otherwise, I enjoyed it, and I hope you do too. Alright? So, I'm going to stop talking and let him take over. See ya.
This is stuff where, books are not as, I don't know that they'll go away, but...
Yeah. I think more of the publishers that I was talking to, they wanted ghost stories, they wanted experiences, and that dealt more with explaining how photographic anomalies were done.
Right.
The shutter speeds and flashlight tricks and just going crazy with all this stuff. Dust particles.
Right. Yeah, there was this sudden change of ghosts from looking like human beings, only sort of transparent.
Yeah.
From the 19th and early 20th century, and then in come the digital cameras, with the built-in flashes, and everybody's got one, and now ghosts have changed their form to look like orbs. I mean, this is an astonishing phenomenon.
This is great. Yeah, we went from full images of people to this ectoplasmic toilet paper stuff that came out, and to little balls of light.
Yeah.
And,
I've done kind of a evolution of ghosts in relationship to cameras, and it's of course it can be done in an amusing fashion.
Yeah.
You say that the early experimental photos and the early daguerreotypes, there were no ghosts, and there weren't any ghosts in tintypes or ambrotypes. Not to speak of. There were maybe an occasional staged ghost effect for a photograph for a theatrical purpose or something, but not real ghost pictures. And then glass plate negatives came in, permitting double exposures, and ghosts just came out, out of the woodwork. They just were everywhere, posing, behind a dead Abraham Lincoln and so forth. So they, or posing as Abraham Lincoln behind Mrs. Lincoln as a spirit, is what I should have said. And it's amazing how that works, and then the phenomenon keeps changing right up to orbs, and really kind of instructive.
The more technical and advanced the cameras get, the more people figure out how to do it.
Yeah,
and It's amazing.
But you get accidental effects, and you can have hoax effects, and the orbs are mostly just accidents. People
they don't realize.
They don't realize what they're getting. But I've done experiments where I would take. I've done this at places like Alcatraz and other sites. I like to do it at a ghost site if I can, and I'd sit somewhere in the near dark and be real still. So you probably get no orbs or very few orbs, and then shake a duster in the air and get thousands of orbs immediately. And I've taught it to science teachers to use as a teaching aid. It's a neat little experiment you can do pretty much anywhere, anytime, and just show what's happening.
I've told people, usually I get asked what kind of camera is best for it, and I try to point them into an SLR camera, because I've noticed with the smaller cameras, the compact cameras, it's so much more common. And if I put a shoe-mounted flash on my camera, I never get the orb effect. Never. Because I'm not highlighting the dust particles right in front of my lens.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest thing that I find that helps people.
And that's the scientific method, is to set up controls, so you're controlling for something.
Right.
If we do it this way, we get orbs. If we don't do this, or if we do it this way, we don't get orbs. And then we can keep trying that, and we can show that orbs are there for,
Right.
And
scientific method. What's that?
yeah, well.
Not too many people are.
Also, kind of often just a trial and error.
Yeah.
But
that's something I've noticed. Like, people don't do the trial and error. They want to do. They take the pictures. They get these neat little circles, and
right, or some other anomaly. They just take lots of pictures, find odd things in them, and then call those ghosts.
Yeah, and they're happy.
Because they don't know. And I think that's the secret for much of the paranormal. I think the paranormal is largely predicated on the false logic of what's called an argument from ignorance. Because I'm sure your video blog wants to be very intellectual and educational. I'll use the Latin here. It's argumentum ad ignorantium, arguing from ignorance. And it goes like this. You're saying, well, we don't know what caused the noise in the old house. No one's been able to figure that out. Therefore, it's a ghost. No, you can't say, I don't know, and then draw a conclusion. There's no therefore to follow. And that's, if you think about it, that's what's happening with the paranormal all across the spectrum. People are recording phenomena in a haunted house, maybe a photograph, and saying, we don't know what caused this glare in the photo. There was nothing there, and it's a mystery. Or we don't know why Mrs. Smith's cancer went into remission after she went to Lourdes, therefore it's a miracle of the Holy Virgin Mary. Or we don't know what the bright light in the sky was. Astronomers couldn't tell us, so it's obviously extraterrestrial craft. And what they're doing is most of the paranormal investigators are just anomaly hunting. They're looking for something that they can't explain, and most of them aren't scientists, so why should they explain it? And they're talking to people who also are not scientists by and large, or they're not scientists in the field that you would need to be in to explain this.
Right.
A geologist might not know what caused, if anything, in a photo. You may not even own a sophisticated camera. So it's really, I think, of all the secrets of the paranormal, that may be the big one. That's the one people can spot pretty quickly, is the argument from ignorance.
Right.
And say, okay, it's a legitimate question what caused this, but if I wasn't there when you made this photo, how do I know what was out of the picture when you made this? Maybe there was some bright reflective surface that reflected the flash or something.
Right.
And it's not that I'm calling you a hoaxer or liar, but how would I know? And so your photograph is really not worth anything. It's not really evidence of anything. It's just another I don't know under conditions where it just doesn't mean anything. And you can't use it to provide proof of the paranormal.
Well, based on what you said there, what's your philosophy towards, I guess, people that, because I come across people that either truly believe they've had an experience, and then there's other people that they're trying to make something out of nothing, and which includes like hoaxers or people that know better and just plain ignore it.
Well, hoaxers should be stood against a wall and shot. So let's just be clear about that.
Okay, I'm good with that.
Ship them off, to Iraq and let them be dealt with by ISIS. I think would be a good thing. But seriously, we do have to be careful about. I've seen a type of skeptic that's very quick to the sort of knee-jerk debunker type skeptic. As soon as I hear a story, I know that's a hoax. No, but they don't. They'll hear somebody describe something. I remember once a guy telling me he was doing an encyclopedia of paranormal stuff, and he was telling me how somebody he knew was going to explain the Flatwoods Monster case of West Virginia in the early 50s as a hoax. And the reason he was going to do it is he had no idea what these boys saw, so they must have made it up. No research, pretty much not much of anything. I had been to Flatwoods, and I had talked to people involved in the case, and I had old newspaper clippings, and I went to the site, and I talked to people, and so I knew that, as one guy told me, those boys were scared. He saw them right after that. And one of them was so scared, he was throwing up. It's a sign of real hysteria. He was physically throwing up. And turned out that their description of a tall creature with shining eyes that glided at them with terrible claws, that's a quote, that had a sort of heart-shaped or spade-shaped, they said, face. They're describing a West Virginia barn owl. That's what they're describing. And if it were perched up on a limb, of course, it's quite tall. And their description was so clear, something they had seen for, a fraction of a second or two. I mean, just something, and scared them to death. And they had gone looking for an extraterrestrial creature, so they had that on their mind because they had seen a flying saucer fly across and land up on the ridge. Well, no, they didn't. They saw a meteor, and bright meteors always look like they landed we could just drive up there.
Yeah.
There's so big they just landed right up. No, they're far, far, far away, but it's an illusion. And that was identified as the meteor in about over three states that it was seen by astronomers. So you could just piece this together and show a much more likely scenario that you had some excitable kids, poor observers, poor observing conditions, but a pretty accurate description of West Virginia barn owl. Or an extraterrestrial creature that had claws and heart-shaped face and shining eyes, and they said that when it came at them with these terrible claws, it made a high-pitched hissing sound, which is that's the barn owl. I actually ended up naming that barn owl Emmy Lou because I was sure it was a female. I kept wondering why is it that he or she, the owl, waited there and didn't just fly off when these people were coming up the country road. And I thought, oh, it's a female brooding young. She's got young there, and she's kind of shushing them or being very quiet mode. But when they shined a light at her, she went on the attack and knew how to do it. Scared the out of them.
Crap at them.
And so I would prefer to argue that way. I'm quite convinced of this analysis. There's much more to it. But I found confirmation of much of this from going back to original sources and original people and so forth. And that's so preferable to because that explains the phenomenon. That's an attempt to explain it.
Right.
If it was a hoax, then you have to imagine that because the meteor was real, you have to imagine that having seen a meteor or having whatever, the boys then thought to create this elaborate hoax and make up this story, and one of them fakes being sick or something. No, the simpler explanation is Occam's razor and fits the known data. And to accuse people of hoaxing is not a good thing to do unless you really have evidence. Because remember, we're going to stand them against a stone wall and shoot them. Oh, okay, we're not going to do that. But I mean, we want to be very careful about accusing people of something if we don't have the evidence. It shouldn't be an excuse because of our poor investigation or our ignorance to accuse somebody who's honestly had an experience, actually seen something. And so that's what I try to do.
That's cool. I like that.
I try to go on scene. My first real, I guess, paranormal case where I really went out and I had some minor things, but was the ghost at McKenzie House in Toronto. And for over 10 years, people have been hearing all kinds of things and having experiences in McKenzie House. And just to give an idea of one of those, the caretaker and his wife lying abed upstairs in the old house would hear at night, sometimes across the house, all the way across the house where the staircase was, they would hear these mysterious thudding footsteps going up or down the stairs. And there was no one in the house, and the house was locked. And how would we explain that? And there were skeptics who would say, they're probably drunk. They probably, or they made it up looking for attention or whatever. But there were multiple ear witnesses, and I suspected, because there were other things that had explanations, that did occur and had explanations. I went to McKenzie House, and I found that next door, only 40 inches away from their staircase, was a parallel iron staircase with a late-night cleanup crew and a caretaker family that at any given time somebody could be going up or down those stairs. And of course it would sound like the footsteps on the stairs in the building. In fact, a tour guide at McKenzie House heard it during the day once. Now, these footsteps, of course, there were people going up and down during the day more than there were at night, but you ordinarily wouldn't hear it because it's just noisy during the day. There's all this street traffic and streetcars and honking horns and people, paying attention to other things, not lying quietly in bed listening. And that was the difference. But she heard footsteps on the stairs during the day once because she was right there. She got over, I think, and put her ear to the wall. And she said, sir, I think there's a staircase next door. And in fact, there was. So that's my approach: is to is hands-on. Let's do an experiment. Let's recreate something mysterious. Let's go and investigate. Let's use the detective approach and try to explain something, not dismiss it or debunk it or just endlessly hype mystery like the ghost hunters do, but to actually try to get to the bottom of paranormal mystery.
That's what I love to do. I love doing that. And over the years, I've learned more and more of how to do that by reading work from you and from Ben Radford. He's a funny guy. And just other well-educated people that really do this. And I remember watching a lecture of yours once when you started out the lecture by saying, I'm not a scientist, but if I need a scientist, I go get one.
Yes.
And that's, I mean, that has, it's a simple quote, but it's so important.
Well, look at. I like to compare what I'm doing, since I have occasionally been a homicide consultant. When I was in graduate school, I got to work on a case that was a cold case, and a forensic friend and I pretty clearly solved this case. And it was an unusual and incredible case. And after that, the police, okay, you could kind of, you were welcome there, let's say. And I found that the detective approach to the paranormal is a pretty good one. In other words, we have people go to the scene of the crime and they're looking for evidence. They're not looking to justify dogma. I mean, suppose one day the police commander, a lieutenant, let's say, is in the homicide bureau, and in comes a sergeant saying, Lieutenant, there's been a shooting across town. What if the lieutenant said, oh, it's probably just another suicide, put it down as a suicide? The guy says, but sir, he was shot 3 times in the back. Yeah, it's a bad case of suicide, but just put it down as a suicide. Well, we wouldn't put up with that. We wouldn't put up with that. We wouldn't allow our police to act that way. We want them to actually investigate. And we want to know not just that it wasn't this or that, but we want to know more specifically what it was. We want to know if it was a murder, who did it, and we want to know how things were done and so forth. Not just some category that we could put something into. Oh yeah, it's another ghost. Right. No, we want to know very precisely how the ghost is able to do this incredible thing when it can't do it in another case. And so I find that analogy is a good one. And the homicide commander, and I've known lots of detectives and crime scene people and so forth, but the homicide commander is not a scientist. When there's a murder somewhere, we don't get the professor from the college to go investigate the crime. We get a detective to investigate it, and he's not a scientist. I mean, there hardly any detectives are actually scientists. But if they go get one when they need it, and of course, the commander who's got a crime scene is going to be sending in all sorts of scientists, fingerprint experts, crime scene people, pathologist is going to be doing an autopsy. You're going to have chemists analyzing tissue samples and so on and on. I mean, quite a number of very specialized scientists. The thing is, maybe no one of those guys would be a good detective. He might not know how to really investigate sort of holistically the crime. I'm lucky to be able to do what I do, but I set out some years ago to try to do this because I enjoyed doing it. I like solving mysteries. So that, if you don't like it, if you don't actually enjoy the work, then you start finding, and I think this is true of some paranormal investigators, maybe some who think they're doing what I do, but I often see them cutting corners and trying to find ways to look like they're doing what I'm doing, but actually maybe really debunking, but trying to look like they did a lot. And I found that there's just no substitute for really enjoying it, because you may have to spend hour upon hour upon hour upon hour in really thankless work, analyzing something or doing some study or whatever, and you'll do that if you enjoy doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You'll put up with
Right.
even the mundane work and the hard work, because you're hoping, and sometimes after many hours or days or weeks of work, you have a failure. It's pretty crushing, unless again you say, okay, well, now I know that's not going to work. That's not it, and you start again. So I'm constantly interested in what I do, and that keeps me going. I know naively, I thought after the McKinsey house, after I had solved that case in a relatively short amount of time, and I thought, well, I just went there and asked some reasonable questions and found an obvious source for the footsteps on the stairs and other things. And I thought, this is how you do it. You go to the scene and you check things out, and you get to the bottom of it. And I thought, if you do this is what I thought. If I just continue to do this, people will believe me and love me for it. Oh wait, that didn't really work out, did it? No, because people say, well, it's just because the skeptic could find this, that doesn't mean that the flying saucer didn't come the other time, or something. and you get hate mail and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're convinced that your work is important, that it, and you don't have to convince everybody. I don't generally try to pitch my message to the true believers. Not that I write them off, but I know that I've got a hard sell, and nothing in terms of logic or evidence is maybe going to have any effect on them. But I believe that between the sort of committed skeptic and the committed true believer are a lot of people who are amenable to evidence. And if you can show them, say, with a Shroud of Turin, they're mystified with all the claims they've heard. Oh, it's got a perfect negative image and it's all this, and most of which is not true. If you can show them that, well, there's this document in Vatican archives about how the bishop found the forger who confessed that he made this, and it was part of a faith healing scheme. Oh, really? And that this shows that, the lack of history for 1,300 years, where was it? And so it was nowhere, because we have somebody who made it.
Mm-hmm.
And that explains why the style of the figure is consistent with French Gothic art, that sort of elongated forms and stuff. And the blood stains are picture-like. They're not like real blood stains, which soak in and just spangle among the fibers and don't leave neat little pictures. And real blood doesn't stay red for centuries, and so on. And
Yeah.
you can show that just common sense to a lot of people will get you pretty far, if you have a chance to say things that you can show are so. And you of course bring in radiocarbon dating, which just happens to give a date almost to the month of the forger's confession. It's just shocking how wonderful that is.
Played out.
And how the Macron laboratories found red ochre and vermilion temper paint explaining that red blood, and so on. And if you can get that message out, then there are people who will be amenable to evidence and will listen to you. And maybe the O.J. Simpson jury isn't one of them, but there are people who can understand evidence, and you can speak to them.
Great. I do get that a lot. I get a lot of people that are against me for what I do, what I write, because I try to look at the popular videos and pictures. I do photography. That's what I do. Well, as a side job, but I consult for a lot of people on photography, and I get a lot of people that like, no, that can't possibly be true. But I'll take the time to demonstrate. This is how it was done, and I'll set everything up and show you how it's done. These are the details. Do it yourself. Here, you push the button. you move the flashlight or whatever,
right.
And you get the better sense of what's going on.
And there are people you can convince.
Yeah.
Even among to be honest. I mean, among the so-called true believers, there are people who are able to understand evidence if they get very caught up in it, and maybe their first reactions to try to explain away your explaining away.
Yes.
But if you really have some powerful evidence, you can shake them up. And I've seen one of the great examples was Father David Sachs, who wrote a book on the Shroud of Turin. He was head of the British Society for the Turin Shroud, and he wrote a pro-shroud book. But when Walter Macron, who he admired, found temper paint all over the image, he just, I mean, I'm sure it was a crisis for him at some level, but he was ultimately able to accept that, and he wrote a really good book, a second book, and it was a totally different book, and I've gotten to know him a little bit, and I really admire that ability, because it was easier for me to come to the Shroud sort of already skeptical and seeing some pretty obvious things to start with, to go on with what I did. Quite different for someone who's really deeply immersed in the belief and the culture of the Shroud and so forth, being able to get out of that and be changed, and I think it's to his credit. Not everybody who's on the other side is anti my work. I have a friend who's an evangelical Christian who does big crusades in South America, and who, as long as I stick to the fake weeping statues and the phony stuff and with clear evidence, he's a big supporter of mine. Absolutely. And I've had others. A priest once wrote me a letter regarding my book, Looking for a Miracle, which is a thoroughgoingly skeptical book, I mean, from beginning to end. And he said that my book was a wonderful gift to the Catholic Church. So a priest wrote me this letter. And you might at first think, yeah, he was being sarcastic, wasn't he? He was kidding you or something. No, he wasn't. He actually meant that.
Good.
Like, okay, you're helping us weed out the fake stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm for you if you can do that. So that's really kind of wonderful when that happens.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea. I want to help them and help myself weed out the hoaxes and the fakes and stuff that's not real. And I would love to actually witness a ghost. I would love to see a spacecraft come down.
Because that's part of the attraction of the paranormal, is that most paranormal claims provide something pretty wonderful. Mm-hmm. If true. If ghosts are true, then we don't really die.
Yeah.
If flying saucers are real, then we are not alone in the universe. Yeah. It's a little harder to make a case for why people are so fascinated by spontaneous human combustion, because if we were voting, we would vote against that unanimously and not be for it. But it's one of those areas that is attractive because it shows there's some kind of mysterious force that's exciting and mysterious and attractive, and everybody loves the mystery. That's why these words like unsolved mysteries and the unexplained and the unknown
unexplainable
are all around for the use of the pro-paranormal people. But see, they're arguing from ignorance. They're saying because it's unexplained, therefore we've got proof of something.
Right.
But in science, you have to have actual proof that the phenomenon exists. Not all this negative proof of we can't explain it, so it exists. And when you start talking like that, they say, well, that may work for ordinary science, but we have this parascience, and it works differently. Well, right, it's driven by the imagination.
Yeah, they don't like to play by the same rules. Has there ever been a case where you couldn't figure out what was going on?
This is my most frequently asked question.
Okay.
Sooner or later, every interviewer, in some form or other, pretty much comes around to it, because I think it is I think it is the essential question.
I tried to think, before I come up here, I was trying to think of questions to ask you that everybody asked me.
Right. That's
So,
what people want to know.
there you
And
go.
so you're asking that on behalf of pretty much everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah. Even skeptics will ask the same question, and maybe with a different implication or interpretation of the answer, but everybody wants to know. And as honestly as I can say, I don't think there are cases where I've had a fair chance to investigate. Now, if something is long ago and far away and I wasn't there and it happened 300 years ago and I have conflicting stories about it, I may not be able to explain to you what the answer is. But where I've had a chance to get my hands on something questionable, or at least get very good evidence that I could analyze or have a chance, I've not found anything that I thought was paranormal or supernatural. That doesn't mean I've explained everything that's been told to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people tell me flying saucer stories all the time. They say, well, what was that? I remember a guy once, one of the first times I heard of the Phoenix Lights in Arizona, and you know, a morning radio guy called me up and told me about it, and he said, so what was it? And I said, I have no idea. And it was shocking to him, because skeptics are supposed to say,
You're supposed to have
and
something.
skeptics will often play that game, you see, and then they'll say, oh, it's probably mass delusion or it's a hoax or something. And with no knowledge of the facts, and well, I didn't have any knowledge of any facts, and I wasn't going to just make up something, you see. Some skeptics, I fear, are all too quick to do that. I'm quite happy to say, I don't know, I haven't looked into that yet. I said, but I told the guy, I said, but I will tell you this. I said that I think the least likely explanation is that it's an extraterrestrial visitation. He said, well, why do you say that then? And I said, well, why would extraterrestrials come to the planet Earth, presumably on some secret mission, and leave their bright lights on? And he just laughed, and so I made kind of a joke out of it. But of course, I have now looked some into this, and my colleague James McGahey, who's both an astronomer and a former military special operations pilot, we've been rather industriously looking at some of these old cases and solving them. And as I tell him, I think it's his job to solve the cases and mine to take credit for it. And but what we actually do is we co-author it. If it's one that he solves, I put his name first.
Okay.
If it's one that's more my hard work and analysis, but I'm hoping he will check me out and make sure I haven't made mistakes and so forth, my name will go first. So we've been cranking out a bunch of these. And the Phoenix Lights is pretty well known now what caused that. They're two different phenomena. And one, the V-shaped, humongous flying craft. Why do you need such a gigantic craft for interstellar flight? This just doesn't make sense. And of course, it was just airplanes flying in a chevron formation, and people just thought it was, you know, one solid object ringed with, you know, with these lights in a triangular shape. The video shows that the lights are moving separately, slightly. So they're independent lights, not part of one fixed craft, all moving exactly in unison. And then the second Phoenix light phenomenon was this parachute flare drop, these bright magnesium flares that light up an area, and they'll knock your eyes out if you see them, and you would be quite mystified by them. They look like something, but we know now who was where and what doing this, and so we know the explanation now.
You visited a lot of psychics, right? I bet.
Yes, not always as Joe Nickell.
Why?
Sometimes
In disguise.
in disguise, or you know, some kind of pretext or situation where I don't always wear a disguise. I've had times where I've just thought I'd take a chance and see if the person had seen me on TV, and you can tell sometimes right off they have not,
Okay.
or that they have, and then you can try a different approach. But I've had some great instances of checking out psychics.
Now, I guess I really want to get into. I've always sat down with them whenever they're willing to sit down with me and do their reading and just see what's going on. But I guess my issue has always been paying them to do that. Like, I want to get the information, I want to have the experience, so if I want to write about it, I can. But how do you feel about...
I'll give you my rationalization for that, and
Okay.
I address this to skeptics everywhere, because I don't know how many skeptics have told me that they can't bear to spend $25 for a book from Sylvia Brown or somebody. They just can't do that. And you can advise, well, just steal the book then. Okay, but no, you're hurting the publisher and the bookstore. The bookstore might be a nice guy, the owner. So here's what you do. I just rationalize this way. Okay, I spent $25 buying Sylvia Brown's book. Okay, I'm going to do her more than $25 worth of harm.
Okay. I see.
Or if they're sincere or whatever, I will do a piece, but I will do a piece that justifies that expense, and any money that a crook gets from me, I will probably have done him much more harm than the $25 fee or the $50 fee. But if the person's not a crook, well, I don't feel so bad about paying the money anyway. I'm gonna again, if I explain it, I'm gonna put a damper on that claim.
Okay.
I'll give you an example, and you can film this later if you want. I've got a picture I'm going to tell you about. There was a lady at the spiritualist camp, Lilydale, who did spirit drawings of your spirit guide. I don't know if you knew that you have your own spirit guides, one or more. And invariably they were Native Americans, because there's a belief that Native Americans make the best spirit guides. Chief Red Cloud and so forth, and they make these up. And so she does these drawings, and it's a little disconcerting, because where a Coney Island sketch artist will look at your face and draw you, she was looking over your shoulder and drawing like this. And it's a little disconcerting. You want to go like this. But I had talked to her at Lilydale, and I could tell she didn't know me from Adam. She didn't seem at all cautious or anything. Nice little old lady, sweet little old lady. And she said, could I come back off season, because she had more time then? And I said, sure. So I called her, and she said, yeah, if you can come. We set a date and time, and I went there. And as she was getting her pastels ready, I said in a kind of casual, offhanded way, now I'm not disguised or anything, and I said, ma'am, I think I saw my spirit guide once. Oh, she said, perking right up. And I said, yes, it was a difficult time in my life, and blah, 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 and so on. And I made up the story, and I said, and I woke up one night, and there, standing by my bed, was this Native American, and he had 3 yellow feathers sticking up. And he said, everything will be all right, my son. And I don't remember what happened after that. And I said, did I mention the 3 yellow feathers? And so she said, yes, that's what they do. That's your spirit guide. That's the way she said, would you like me? She said, we can give him a name. We could call him Yellowbird. I said, oh, for the 3 yellow feathers. And she said, yes, we could call him Yellowbird. And we're permitted to do that, she said.
That's good.
And she said, would you like me to try to contact Yellowbird for you? And I said, it would mean a lot to me. And so she begins then to sort of look and so forth. And pretty soon she's begun to sketch. And she had said to me something like, well, I'm seeing a big, strong guy. And I was going, and she said, but his hair wasn't, she's looking at me, maybe kind of reading me, And she said it was more, and I'm nodding, and so forth. Now, so she did this drawing, which I'll show you. kind of an amateur. She's not a great artist, but she's a spiritualist, and she's come up with Yellowbird with the 3 yellow feathers, of course. Now, here's the question that I have. I honestly don't know whether she said to herself, okay, this sucker wants a drawing of an Indian with 3 yellow feathers, I'll give it to him and collect my $50. Or whether she actually got into my story so well that she could just picture her version of Yellowbird and believe that she was contacting him because she's a fantasy-prone personality who made that seem very real to her, and that's what she drew. I don't have any easy way to know what was in her mind. I am reasonably certain that Yellowbird is fictitious because I made him up. Of course, I have skeptic friends who say, yeah, but see, because he's really real, and that's what you know. Well, okay, we can joke about it, but I made Yellowbird up, and it was a test case for me to see, and you can see that she did not get this in the spirit realm. But I'm still not sure that I mentioned she was a really sweet little old lady. I don't know that she, was necessarily in a shrewdly dishonest and deliberately fraudulent way doing this. And in a sense, it doesn't much matter because I know hypothetically and for some real cases, there are both types out there. The point is, I tested her. She did not succeed in any meaningful way. Mm-hmm. Now, do I feel bad about giving the $50 to her? I don't. If ever there was $50 well spent, I have told that story many times. I'm telling it again. It's just a great piece of lore from the spiritualists and worth every penny of it to me. So I just think don't begrudge the money you have to spend. Okay. Within reason. Within reason. Yeah. But if you wanted to give Sylvia Brown, if Sylvia were still with us, if you let's have a moment. let's have a moment of silence. That's long enough. Sure. So if Sylvia were still with us, and she wanted $2,000 for something she was going to do for you, I would prefer that you give her some counterfeit money or something, or a bad check. Agreed. But up to a point, a few dollars. I tell people don't begrudge that. Just make your investigation worth that expense. Mm. I'm using quite often donor money. I have a wealthy couple that put up money for me to have a special fund, John and Mary France, and they put some money in a bank account, and I've never touched it. I just use the interest off of it. It allows me to do some things. I'm very frugal with that money, and I think it's paid many dividends over, and I think they would be very happy with my use of that money.
Cool. So I guess that would bring me to my last question. Like, how do you get the sweetest job in the world? Like this, to me, this is what I would love to do. This would be my dream job.
Well, you're not the first one to say that.
I'm sure.
But some skeptical idiot recently said, who was decided to be nasty to me for some reason, and he said, well, somebody gave me that job, I guess I could go out there and solve all these mysteries, kind of thing. And my natural first thought was, who on earth would hire an idiot like you to do anything of the sort? And the answer to him is that I really created the job. This wasn't a job that one day, Paul Kurtz put an ad in the paper. Wanted. Paranormal investigator. Must have strong detective background. Magical skills, a definite asset. And so on. No, that didn't happen. What happened was more like what happened with Sherlock Holmes. He was a real person, wasn't he? Or was he fictitious? I forget. But Sherlock told Watson in a famous exchange when they first met that he had picked his job out of having assessed what he liked to do and what his skill set was, and that being a detective was sort of the thing that would allow him to do that best. And he said he was the only one in the world. And Watson was kind of incredulous, like, what, the only detective? And Holmes said something like, well, the only private consulting detective, sort of like this. And that's kind of what happened to me. I was in the late 60s and early 70s, I was very interested in the paranormal because, for example, I ended up at the Houdini Hall of Fame, and Houdini was doing paranormal investigations and it's a model for all of us. And I met James Randi. And I thought, gee, that's pretty neat what he does, going out investigating things. Now, I've taken a rather different approach from Randi, I think. And, Randi's mostly doing some sort of psychic investigation involving someone who claims special powers. That's most of what he's doing. And he's not doing a lot of flying saucers, a lot of going into a lot of haunted houses or whatever, but he's sure, and he's the best in the world at what he does. What I tried to do was this sort of detective approach to case by case by case by case in all these other areas, and including, of course, psychic areas. And I started because I just liked doing it, but I found that it allowed me to do a lot of my different interests, to apply those, forensics, magic, folklore, and so forth. And so I kind of invented, at least my idea of somebody doing this kind of job. And I proceeded then to do that. And by the time I had pretty well shown how the Shroud of Turin could be forged, which had been said to be impossible for anyone, and so forth. And I came to Paul Kurtz's attention, and several more such things. Paul was looking for a guy like me, and he said, why don't you come here? Now, the problem with the Center for Inquiry, and I'm sure it's okay if I say this, rather than give people large salaries, being a not-for-profit, they just give you a fancy title, you see. And so they, Paul said, how would you like to be Senior Research Fellow? And I thought, wow, that sounds good, doesn't it? That's worth several thousand right there. So I was able to get someone, in other words, to pay me to do what I was doing. But I was already doing it, you see, and they wanted me to come and do this. And I know since then there are all sorts of people have told me around the world they want to do what I do and so forth. Well, I want them to do it as well. The ones who really do thorough work and are careful and so forth, I want to see them succeed. And I have been disappointed a time or two. But I think people have to just be self-starters. I didn't have any expectation that somebody was going to hire me to do this, ever. I mean, where are these jobs? Well, I guess they could sit around and hope I die or something. But no, that's not how I started. I didn't start by hoping that Randi would die. I wanted Randi. To this day, we're great friends, and if I needed help on something, I have no trouble calling him right up and picking his brains. So I just was doing what I wanted to do as an avocation, and doing it for free. And this organization was, found me, and particularly Paul Kurtz did, and Barry Carr would call me up and say, can you do the Oprah show, or can you, or maybe you could look into this. We're getting a lot of questions about this phenomenon or something. And I was working for free until finally they got the new building and asked me to come here. And I said something like, oh, I'm too smart to move to Buffalo. Something like that.
Well,
how arrogant of me. And Barry said, Oh, it hardly ever snows here. You know. And yeah, I was at the University of Kentucky as a part-time instructor, having gotten my doctorate and so forth. But I was already, even then, I was already on the executive council and, you know, speaking for PsyCop, as it was then called, a lot, and going on TV and stuff. And I did finally come here and been given pretty free. You know, Paul never tried to tell me what to do. He would maybe ask me, would you mind doing this, or could you do that, or what do you think of this? Because the presumption is that if you've kind of invented this field and you're doing it, maybe you know what should be done, or you know, maybe that's part of the job, is just leave the guy alone.
Yeah.
And Paul did that, and so we, you know, I know that till he died, he was very happy. Not that we didn't occasionally have disagreements or something, but that he liked what I did and was always proud. And you know, I hope to keep doing this for, you know, until they have to come and pry the pen and magnifying glass out of my cold dead hand.
There you go. That's good. That's inspiring. I mean, that's what I do. I do all my, not that I'm on par with you, but I do what I do for free because I like it.
And
I enjoy it.
One of the things that I note about you is that you're using skills that you have with cameras and videos and so forth, and you're relying a lot on those skills, and that's a real smart thing to be doing. See, somebody who's got a background in psychology can use that, and that will mean maybe that you won't be doing the cases that have a strong psychological element so much as you'll look for the ones that have a photo mystery or something where you can do. Similarly, the psychologist may not be doing your cases, and he's got a set of ones he can do, and you try to use the skills you have, and that may tell you this case is really not for me. Or, remember, my motto, you can always, if you need a scientist, you can go get one. So the detective can always do that. But sometimes you'll realize that some particular area is just probably not something you would be able to add a lot to, and why not leave that to scholars in the field or something. But that particularly if you have an idea of an investigative strategy, like, well, what if I tried to see if I could, you know, I'm suspicious of that photo. Something about it says fake to me. What if I could, seems impossible, they say, but maybe I could find a way to duplicate that.
Yeah.
And then that might tell you something. And you might decide, no, it isn't faked, or look, here's how it's done. And so people have their own skill sets and their own interests and so forth, and I urge people to use those to start with anyway, to get some cases, and then just go from there. But I, of course, as a man of 1,000 personas, well, it's funny because sometimes I will have skills that you would not have thought would ever, not so much as you would doubt that I would have them, because you know I'm a hack of all trades, but that would end up being useful in the paranormal. But I'll mention one, and that's being a gilder, someone who can lay gold leaf. Well, I used to run a little sign business for several years when I was a teenager, and I can gold leaf anything professionally. And so I know a good bit about gilding. So there was this glowing statue in Campbell, Ohio, pair of glowing statues actually, on back to back on a church tower. And someone asked me if I'd heard about the glowing statues, and it was late on a Friday, and I was walking out the building, and I just turned around, and I said, "What?" And they said, "Well, I'd heard weeping statues. I had met more of these statues than most people will in their lifetime, but I hadn't heard of glowing statues really." And I said, "Find me everything you can find on that real quick." and I ran back down here and I packed my glowing icon kit. What's in a glowing icon kit? Well, you know, camera, of course, copy of my book, Looking for Miracles, you know, bologna sandwich, maybe, whatever.
Yeah.
Things you think you might, you don't know, but you put together, you know, evidence collecting and so forth. At the time, I really had no idea how far up on the tower, and I was going to be getting up there with the extension ladder. But so I'm heading off, for the next morning early, I'm heading off to Campbell, Ohio. Kind of in the guise at first of a pilgrim, you know, with a big cross around my neck and so forth. And then later I got rid of that because that was, I didn't need to be limited to playing that role. I could just be, you know, just be upfront about coming to investigate. It was better for me. And I would be standing out there, and this elderly couple, you know, oh Martha, look, you know, the statue is glowing. And I'm thinking, yeah, the sun is shining, and there are these gilded areas, the Sacred Heart and the eyes and the halo. And I, you know, so I had some binoculars and I was looking at it, and I could spot the gilding. And I could see that it was real gilding, not gold paint or something. It was real gold leaf. And then, you know, oh Martha, it's not glowing now. And you think, oh, the sun's gone behind the clouds, sir. You know, kind of thing. And I talked to the priest, and he was in full agreement. The bishop was in full agreement. They knew what was going on there, but people were going gaga over it. It's interesting work. It's rewarding work, and someday you'll be rich and famous, or infamous and broke.
I'll take that. I don't mind that.
So
I think if I was rich, I would just do this anyway. This is what I love to do.
Yeah.
You know, I would just be well funded.
I mean, I wouldn't want the people here to know that, you know, that I actually like this so much that, you know, that the fact that they pay me to do it is
bonus. Do it anyway.
But I used to joke that way to Paul and Paul Kurtz. I used to tell Paul, I'd say, well, you know, Paul, I'm just a hack of all trades. And he'd wag his finger at me and he'd say, no, you're a jack of all trades and master of several.
There you go.
And, well, okay, but I hack of all trades.
Cool.
But it is good to be, if you're an investigator, it's good to be a generalist.
Mm-hmm.
You can go get the specialist. Forget the term scientist or whatever so much as that the detective is a kind of generalist. And good homicide detectives know a good bit about fingerprinting and DNA and stuff. They're not scientists, and they wouldn't be the one to go do the work. But they know a lot about what can be done, and they pick it up over time, and they're pretty conversant with the lingo of a lot of these areas. And they're generalists. They know a little of this and a little of that and so forth. And that's good for the detective to be a generalist, so he can put pieces together. And then he can bring in the big guns to say, okay, now let's see precisely about this DNA. Let's see if this fingerprint, let's get serious here now.
Yeah.
And that's where the other people come in, or the other tests.
That's what I love about this, because it does expand everything that I know, because depending on what I'm working on, it leads me into different cases and different areas that I knew nothing about. So
Absolutely.
I get to research them and learn.
Absolutely.
And I love that.
And you know, anyone with some intelligence and the right attitude can do this kind of work. At what level, of course? Obviously, if you're a genius who will be able to maybe to do some things, or if you're especially creative, I think creativity can be very useful in the paranormal. Some people aren't so creative. There are cases where being creative, like you have to think how you would do that if you know,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But there's so much work can be done by a person with just some, you know, rational thinking and the right attitude. You really must have the right attitude, which is, again, not, let me see if I can find something people can't explain and call that a ghost. Now that's not going to work. And you can't have that. And you shouldn't be a dismisser or just a knee-jerk debunker, an armchair debunker. But if you're willing to get up out of the armchair and go to sites and take a good hard look at things and try to get to the bottom of things, and that's easier said than done. But if you try that, you will make mistakes, but you will be on the right track.
And I'll learn from the mistakes.
You will.
And then, like you said, every time I get sent videos, I get sent pictures. I work with MUFON. I'm not a member of MUFON, but they send me pictures. I'm Facebook friends, I guess, with a lot of the field investigators and state directors, and they send me a lot of photos. And that's what I do as soon as I see them. How would I do this?
Yeah.
All right. And I drive my wife crazy sometimes because it'll be 1 o'clock in the morning when I get something if I'm up, and I'll be outside with the flash and lights and a pole.
This is what we should do.
What we do.
And I sometimes feel like I have more in common with the person on the other side who's an open-minded believer, someone who's, yes, they would like to believe or whatever, but they're beginning to be skeptical about a lot of stuff, and they don't want to be fooled, and they want to know what's really going on. Now, I can be friends with them maybe better than I can the close-minded, knee-jerk skeptic who wouldn't get out of his armchair and walk across the street if someone would hand an explanation to him because he's convinced. I think there are these sort of top-down and bottom-up approaches. There is a kind of top-down approach where up here in a kind of intellectual way you can know about a lot of science, you can know about logic, you can take a case and kind of reason that this is unlikely to be a ghost, let's say. And I'm not against that. I'm not against people doing that. I think that could be very useful to do that. But it's the bottom-up approach that I'm advocating. Go there, roll up your sleeves, take samples, check out people, set a trap for whatever. And that approach is more apt to get you the specifics of this case. Yes, okay, this top-down approach may show you it's probably not a ghost. Okay, well, we sort of knew that to start with.
Mm-hmm.
Not likely to be a ghost. Okay, is that all we're concerned about? Or do we really want to know what's causing the footsteps on the stairs noise?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I'm coming in. And the top-down approach isn't very good for that, I think.
Right. That would go more general everything, but it doesn't give you, like you said, the details of that case.
And again, top-down, you can use the shotgun approach. You can say, well, the footsteps on the stairs could be, they could have had a waking dream. There could be, and you can make a long list, and one of those might be, is there an adjacent staircase?
Right.
But you see, it's just better, I think, to go and check things out and find the actual explanation. Of course, nothing's infallible, and nothing's, you can't be absolutely sure that you have the truth in every case. But what you do is you propose what appears to be the most likely explanation with the best evidence. And that's pretty objective that you can make that argument. And someone may not like that, may not like your explanation, but they have to do more than just dismiss you or say, well, I have another explanation. No, you can reach a point, I've written about this, where you can put together what you would call the preferred hypothesis. That is, your hypothesis now has much corroborative evidence to back it up, accounts for the major points of evidence. It's a pretty strong hypothesis. Maybe there's a little problem or two. If those aren't fatal problems, absolutely fatal problems, then you have the preferred hypothesis. And someone can point out whatever they want to, but they can't just not like it. What they have to do is come up with a better one, and that may indeed become a preferred hypothesis, and then you're out of luck on that. But not really, because you've advanced, that you've played a point in the evolution of that idea. I mean, I've made more than one mistake, and one of them was when because the Mothman issue was coming up again, and I'd done the Flatwoods Monster, and I knew a bit about Mothman, and I kind of wrote a piece saying that it was probably the barn owl again. And that was a mistake, and I didn't follow my own rules so much. I just extrapolated from a case I knew, and I extrapolated over to here. But had I been to Point Pleasant? I had not been. Had I really delved into the work as thoroughly as I had not. What was my excuse? Well, it was timely if I could get a piece out right now because it was in the news. And I didn't show a great moral failing or something, but I rushed into print. And later I had occasion where I could go to Point Pleasant, and I spent some time in Point Pleasant. And I revised my piece. Let me get this poem.
Sure.
All right, so there you go, guys. That was a glimpse into my day with Joe Nickell. I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot from the guy. And I suggest that if you're a ghost hunter or a paranormal investigator, whether you're looking for ghosts, spirits, or UFOs, or Bigfoot, or whatever, check him out. I mean, even if you don't like skeptics, it's still somebody that you can learn from. So I suggest you get on Google, type in his name, Joe Nickell, and look to see what he has. I mean, he works for Center for Inquiry. He writes for Skeptical Inquirer magazine. And he has a dozen or so books, at least. I don't know the exact number, but he has a whole bunch of books out. And it's all dealing with the paranormal cases around the world that he investigates. And not only does he tell you about the case, but he tells you all the details and exactly how he solves them, how he researches them, and all the details he found that comes to the most plausible conclusion of what happened. And it's really good. It's really beneficial. I mean, I value the guy's opinion, and I can't promote him enough. So I'll leave it at that. There you go. If you have any complaints or insults or hate mail, please refer to Lou Castile in California. He's my complaint department. He's also Mexican, so if you piss him off, he will kill you while eating a burrito or a taco, whatever he prefers that day. I also want to plug the new video series that we do. I wouldn't really call it a podcast yet, but maybe it is. I don't know. We do a podcast called Geeks and Ghosts. Ooh, look at that. Ain't that cool? Well, what we do is we talk about ghosts, paranormal stuff. We talk about Bigfoot and UFOs, and we also talk about geeky stuff. We talk about science fiction, movies, cartoons, comic books, Comic-Cons. We talk about science. And we have a great time. We joke, we laugh, we insult each other constantly throughout the show. And it's good. I think we've done 6 episodes so far. We're set to do another one in about 2 days. And the last one we had Mitch Silverstein, a real scientist, on. And it was great. He explained a lot of stuff that we questioned about a specific machine that's being used in paranormal research. The next episode we're going to have Melanie from the Military Veterans Paranormal on, and she's going to talk about an investigation she had at Bobby Mackey's and what happened during it. It's going to be fun. It's a real cool show. It's loose. We don't get too serious, and when we do, Lou usually asks stupid questions to break it up and make it funny. Okay, so I think that's all I have. Again, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time. See ya.